Okay, so thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'll continue letting people in from the waiting room as they join, but I'll go ahead and introduce our presenters this afternoon. We have Paul Woodworth and Alex Krofta joining us here. Some of you likely know them from working alongside projects or from meeting them at events. Paul Woodworth is our Ecological Restoration Senior Project Manager. Alex Krofta is our Ecological Restoration Project Manager. Paul is a certified ecological restoration practitioner and fluvial geomorphologist with extensive experience in environmental consulting and the many phases of project development for the restoration of rivers, floodplains, inland wetlands, and tidal marshes, including over 50 dam removals. Alex is our ecological restoration project manager. He's led riparian buffer restoration projects in the Merrimack River watershed and worked with the Massachusetts Division of Fisheries and Wildlife before joining Save the Sound in 2019. He has over a decade of experience working in environmental conservation, from reptile and amphibian research to land stewardship and management and ecological design and planning. So I know I'm looking forward to hearing from them, and I'll turn it over to Paul to get started.
Great, thank you. Let me bring up the screen, right? Let's make sure that's working. Let's see if it's working. You tell me with a thumbs up if you can see. Good. Okay, great. Thank you, Anne, Amanda. You guys pulled this off. I wouldn't even have embarked on this without your logistical support, so I appreciate that. And to the rest of you, thanks for joining us. As Anne said, my name is Paul Woodworth. I'm a senior project manager at Save the Sound. I joined the organization back in February of this year. Prior to that, I worked about 14 and a half years in environmental consulting in the restoration of water resources with a particular focus on dam removal, and was intimately involved in the removal of 50 plus dam removals, stopped counting after about 55 or so, throughout the northeastern United States. And so with that, I was super excited that Save the Sound is also interested in sort of moving ahead on this type of work. And I'm very happy to be able to continue that work with Save the Sound. And so I'm going to go on here and I'll talk about dam removal and ecological restoration. Let's see if this is going to arrow for me. No, it's not. There we go. First, a bit about Save the Sound. I mean, you're all members, so you must have some knowledge of Save the Sound, but it doesn't hurt to sort of go back over. You know, we're a pretty powerful environmental organization in the region that's advocating on a lot of different fronts and making progress in a lot of different areas. We have expertise in legal action. We have attorneys. We have legislative and policy experts. We have advocacy and environmental justice experts. We have water quality experts. We have our own in-house laboratory. We house the Soundkeeper, which is watchdogging across the sound. And we have experts in science and engineering. And in much of that, we sort of frame this work, or the work we do, into four primary program areas: climate and resiliency, healthy waters, protected lands, and ecological restoration, which is the team that I'm a member of, and Alex is as well. You can learn more about our work and the projects we do by checking out our website. We have a really great impact map. You'll see the breadth of our projects and the type of work we do across the region. We are a geographically focused organization, so we are focused on the Long Island Sound watershed in Connecticut and New York, which includes a part of New York City, the Bronx, Queens, and parts of Long Island, North Shore of Long Island, and all of the state of Connecticut. And of course, the watershed of Long Island goes farther north, but we sort of pass off responsibility to some of our partners that do more work in the upper parts of the watershed. So we are very focused in Connecticut and southeastern New York. So our ecological restoration team has a handful of approaches that we're currently most focused on. these are sort of roughly broken down into watershed planning and stormwater green infrastructure type work. That's dealing with non-point source pollution and rain gardens and infiltration. We also deal with coastal resiliency and living shoreline type projects that involve marsh restoration, oyster habitats, and a new sort of experimental phase is eelgrass habitat restoration. And then the work that we're also very active in is loosely or generally be called aquatic connectivity and fish passage work. And that's primarily road stream crossing assessments. So looking at culverts and dam removal, which is the focus of today's talk. And I meant to say that if anybody has any questions as I'm going, feel free to raise your hand or interject in some way, maybe to the chat. I can try to field some of the quick ones as I'm going. I have no problem stopping and addressing comments. Anything bigger, and we can carry that to a Q&A period at the end of Alex Krofta's talk too. So to understand about dam removal, we got to understand a little bit about the landscape of dams or dams in our landscape. There are some 4,000 dams in the state of Connecticut and almost 200 or so in New York in this portion of Long Island Sound's watershed. That's a density that's, well, it looks intense on this map. It can be a bit deceiving because of the size of these dots make it seem like the entire state is covered in it. But it is a high density of dams across the landscape. And when you compare 4,000 some odd dams to about 8,000 mapped stream miles, that's basically 1 dam per 2 miles of map stream in the state. So that's pretty intense. And it's not atypical. Massachusetts has some portions of the state that are even more dense, and but much of basically southern Maine through New England into the mid-Atlantic, and even some of the southeastern states have similar densities and settlement histories that drove the establishment of so many dams. So from that, we got to emphasize that not all dams are created equal. Most dams have a single function, and they vary widely. We have hydroelectric dams. This example here on the Housatonic River. This is such a sizable structure. The dam has a name. The pond or the lake behind it has its own name. Sometimes people know the lake but don't know the dam. It's such an enormous footprint on the landscape, and that is an active hydropower. It has a unit, power generation unit. It's connected to the grid. You see power lines coming out of it. Very big, very powerful, and providing a very valuable service to society. To the right of that, we have a water supply reservoir in the east branch of the Farmington River. As an example, this is a beautifully maintained, beautifully built, enormous structure, massive amounts of water coming out of it and basically being funneled to the Hartford region. So a valuable resource here. To the lower left, we have a flood control dam. This one in particular is the Mad River Dam just upstream of Winsted, built after 1955, when 1955 destroyed Winsted. And those dams also are very large on the landscape. However, the vast majority of those dams that I was looking at on the map previously are basically relict dams that were hydropower technically, but not hydroelectric, never really electrified, just formerly what we call hydromechanical. They were basically connected to a mill dam or a mill powerhouse and used for either cutting lumber, grist mill, textile mills, that sort of activity over the years since colonization and through the Industrial Revolution. These sorts of distributed power sources were essential to early American colonial history and expansion. So these are the kinds of structures that we are most often looking at. The fact that this dam is only 5 feet high, it's not much taller than the average person, doesn't matter from a fisher's perspective. It is still a complete barrier to fish migration. So we still look at these structures as something that are that have a pretty detrimental impact to our systems, and I'll get into more of that. The ownership of these dams is also a pretty interesting phenomenon. You see the vast majority of these, 75% or 78%, are in private hands. Some of them are tribal, although that's a very small percentage. Also a very small percentage are federally owned. That's usually an Army Corps structure. That's a flood control dam. Some are in public utilities. I should tell you that this dam database, and actually the map I showed you, did not include water supply reservoirs. Those are not even mapped for public safety reasons. Everybody can easily find it out, but it's not something that's put up for easy download and viewing by Connecticut Dam Safety. And I should tell you that a lot of this information is publicly accessible. You can go onto the Connecticut DEP's DEEP's website for dam safety. You can actually download the database. You can see it. They also have a really good viewer up there. You can pan around the state, zoom in and zoom out, just like Google Earth or Google Maps, and you can find a dam in your neighborhood if you're curious about it and learn some basic information about it. And so these dams, I have two pictures here. One on the right is actually a dam on the Bronx River. Has not really much of a name, not much of a purpose anymore, but nonetheless is still a full barrier to fish migration. And the one on the left here actually popped up in one of our culvert assessment projects, where it was looked at as like, oh, basically a culvert under a road. Well, actually that drop structure right there that has water falling into it, connects to a culvert, goes onto a road, that technically is a dam, and sure enough, it's on the dam safety database. So that is another example of a fairly small structure that still is something we are considered and is regulated as a dam. Dams are regulated by the state. They are given hazard classifications. These are classifications that are based on how much damage would occur if the dam were to suddenly fail. So it's damage to land or roadways or structures, the possible loss of life, or any sort of economic loss. And the Connecticut DEEP has a lettering system that's unique to the state, but the general breakdown is similar, sort of negligible at the lowest end, through low hazard, moderate hazard, significant hazard, and then high hazard dam. And you can see from this chart that I have here that most of these structures that we're looking at, 45% or so, are low. Another 12% are negligible. 17% are moderate, and just a very few are actually in the high hazard classification. I should be very clear here that hazard classification is a very different thing than the condition of the dam. It is not something that says this dam is not good. It's a high hazard for that reason. High hazard really has nothing to do with the actual condition. As two examples here on the lower left here, here's a very degraded old mill dam. It's in very poor shape. It's leaking. Its crest is degrading. Some of the masonry is falling out of it. It's in poor condition, but it is a low hazard dam. If it were to fail, there's not much damage that would come from that. In contrast to the dam on the right, which is a major flood control reservoir, that's basically a highly maintained, very well inspected by engineers on a regular basis, regular maintenance routines. Any sort of damage is usually rectified in very short order. That dam is being monitored, and there is an operator, there's a team of people that are basically paying attention to that dam on a regular basis. So that is a high hazard dam, but it's in very good condition. So those two concepts are separate, but related. And so, and typically to establish the condition, you'd hire an engineer. They would look at the spillway, the abutments, the earthen berm, the appurtenant structures, the raceways, anything associated with that dam, and look for signs of failing concrete, cracking, spalling, vegetation growing up on an earthen section of a dam, or sloughing of the soil in anywhere, and then would give it a rating of like good, fair, poor condition. Let me know if there's any questions about that. I'm going to keep moving on. Dams impart an impact on the landscape. I've broken them down here into sort of fields of science, which may be not the most receptive to an audience, but hydrologic and hydraulic, they basically alter the flow regime. They stop water. They turn a flowing river into a linear impoundment or some kind of a lake. So it drastically alters the hydrology and the hydraulics of a site and the hydrology of a watershed. They also have a geomorphic impact. This happens to be my area of interest, so I like to always talk about this. They trap sediment. They don't usually allow sediment to convey. That sediment accumulates in the impoundment, along with any of the contamination that might be coming with that sediment. It buries the substrate in the impoundment. And then in the downstream effect is also a sort of a cascading effect where you have sediment deprivation. Streams need to carry water, sediment, organic debris, and if you cut off the sediment, Well, that results in a sediment deprivation condition that starves. It's sort of a sediment starved scenario, and it actually exacerbates channel erosion downstreams of dams. So, so that's a sort of a downstream and an upstream effect. The other effects are physical, chemical, or water quality related. They tend to increase temperature. They tend to trap water. They make it more slower moving. They give it more exposure to the sun. So that increases the temperature, and that also has the effect of basically decreasing its dissolved oxygen. Most aquatic organisms are consuming oxygen through respiration, through gills or something similar. And if you have a deprived dissolved oxygen, then you're going to have an ecological impact in that way too. And then finally, as a direct ecological impact as well, you're blocking the movement of resident fish, and you're blocking the migration of migratory fish, as well as other aquatic organisms. Mussels are an important or a high level concern. They only move with fish gills. If a fish can't move, then mussels don't move. And so populations of mussels are severely depleted and threatened, with extinction globally. And all it takes is a single mill dam to cut off mussel population, half of its watershed. So, and I mentioned macroinvertebrates and reptiles and amphibians as well as being organisms that are impacted by their movement up and down a river corridor. Now, converse to that, so with all those impacts related to dams, then dam removal can actually reverse a lot of that. You can restore, by removing a dam, you get an immediate response in terms of restoring free-flowing condition. You can uncover river habitat, and you can start restoring river habitat downstream by restoring the flow of sediment. You can reduce your temperature and increase your dissolved oxygen, and you restore, and almost immediately restore the movement of resident fish and restore the passage of migratory fish. And many of our projects are being funded with the intent to restore populations of migratory fish in our area. And we have 5 primary migratory fish that we are focused on: American shad, blueback herring, alewife, sea lamprey, which are native to the northeastern coast, and American eel. And so those are the species that we are often looking at in terms of trying to reestablish fish runs and reestablish their populations in Long Island Sound. So related to those benefits, we see dam removal as ecological restoration. And so ecological restoration is being spearheaded on a global scale by the Society for Ecological Restoration. Several of my colleagues are members of that. We're in the Northeastern chapter. This is the organization that has sort of risen, I'd say, to the moment in terms of establishing standards for ecological restoration, definitions for it, and guidance documents to try to measure and improve upon the science and practice of ecological restoration. They define ecological restoration as the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. Ecological restoration aims to move a degraded ecosystem to a trajectory of recovery. And I think that's important to note here, that dam removal doesn't necessarily immediately restore an ecosystem. It's going to take many actual dam removals to set the river back on a trajectory, to get fish populations back up to where they were prior to the damming era or dam building era of the Northeast. And so it's a long-term process that occurs long after the yellow machines have left the site. And to convey some of this, we look to this ecological recovery wheel, which helps us sort of identify the impacts, the positive impacts that dam removal can have. It can have a dramatic impact on species composition, structural diversity, ecosystem function, external exchanges. All these elements around this ecological recovery wheel are meant to sort of convey the effects that any restoration project can have and should actually aim to achieve. And really, you use this wheel that you start out on sort of a center. The closer to the center is the lowest sort of category, and over time or after restoration implementation, you sort of reevaluate your site and your ecosystem, and can show growth or show uplift in ecological functions by using this restoration wheel. It's a good way to organize thoughts and a good way to sort of communicate the effect that ecological restoration can have. So now I'd like to move to some of the projects that Save the Sound is completed, some of our successful projects, and these happen to be ones that I worked on when I was in consulting too, so I have a little bit of overlap with them. This is the Clark Brothers Dam on the Quinnipiac River in Southington, Connecticut. Know that this is the Lowhead Dam that I've been talking about, sort of in decrepit condition. To the right is a picture of that exact dam post-removal. River flowing through, structure out of the way. Not a huge imprint on the landscape. This is an aerial view. The aerial to the left is with the dam in place. The aerial to the right is with the dam removed. You probably can't even tell where it is. I'll give you a little hint with my mouse right here, but this is the dam right here. This is a bowling alley right to the left of it. It's a very sinuous stretch of the Quinnipiac River, except for this stretch that was most definitely straightened at one point, probably during the creation of that highway. But that removal restored passage to the site, but actually had very little impact or sort of change in terms of like the loss of a lake or lakefront property or anything like that. Nothing like that very dramatic happened. And then because I'm a geomorphologist and I was involved in the design process, I love to look at these sites and these projects through the eyes of the river profile. It's a very explanatory or powerful tool for sort of estimating or evaluating the impacts of a project and predicting how the river is going to respond. And in this particular profile, flow is moving from left to right. This represents the masonry dam that was here. It has a very small footprint. This is the crest of that dam. These two lines represent sediment. So this is the sort of the top of sediment. And then this dashed line represented the bottom of sediment that we anticipated to become re-exposed after this dam was removed and sediment transport resumed. And that's it's one of the ways that we design for and communicate these effects to project partners, our landowners, and to the regulatory agencies. I'm going to switch now to another project. We call this the Hyde Pond dam removal project. This is on Whitford Brook. It's on the border of Groton and Stonington, and actually a little bit of Ledyard. So it's right up there. Whitford Brook had been known to have a really strong fish run, including sea run brook trout, but other sea run brown trout, but also the migratory species that I was speaking of. And it actually had a fish ladder on it. You can just barely make it out right here in this photo right here. However, the dam was in such poor condition, it was leaking so much that even at low flows, it was leaking so much water, there was barely any water going down the fishway. So the fishway was ineffective and was not working there because of that aging structure. So with that in mind, the fishway was removed to be relocated to another place where it could do some good. And this dam was then removed and through a sort of a multi-stage construction process that involved a lot of sediment management, or I should say a partial excavation of sediment. So this excavator here has some pipes diverting flow around it, excavating sediment out of what was a pilot channel, placing the sediment up on a floodplain spot behind it. And then basically that area was then replanted by somewhat by the contractor in charge, but then mostly by Save the Sound and volunteers afterwards. And this is an example of what the site came to look like soon after. This was a pretty interesting site. It's different from other sites in that I'm gonna back up. So move ahead here. So this is a series of aerials of this site. This aerial here represents right after dam removal. So this pilot channel had been excavated, but notice no activity. We didn't propose to do any activity up into this. This is a situation where the dam had been much higher than it was today. A lot of sediment had accumulated over the hundreds of years that it had been there. That sediment had become very densely vegetated. It basically formed a stream wetland complex, which is a way of sort of saying this was a stream and a wetland. It's very hard to distinguish the two. They're basically intertwined. And rather than proposing what I would have called a heavy-handed approach of trying to excavate a whole new channel up through it, we agreed to basically excavate only some sediment and allow the site to adjust passively over time. And this is a sequence of these aerials, so 2016, 2017, and 2018, that show how actually minor and how slow and gradual the transition on this site has been. And it still remains a very vibrant wetland. There had been concerns by some of the regulatory agencies that if you remove this dam, you're going to drain this wetland. Not the case at all. This remains a very vibrant, very wet space. And it's and it has a unique assemblage of vegetation. And that site is just one of those examples where passages have been restored, but wetland and floodplain functions have remained very much in place. So, and here's the profile. In this case, flow is from right to left. This represents the dam here. This represented the sediment that was excavated prior to construction, and these two lines, the brown line represents the top of sediment right at the time of removal, and the red line represented the bottom of sediment that we probed and identified in the design process, but was eventually re-exposed through passive sediment migration over time. So those are two projects that we've completed, and now I just want to touch on a couple sort of apples in our eye, the projects that we have active right now. We're working on the Kinneytown Dam project on the Naugatuck River. This is in Seymour and Ansonia. It's a beautiful part of the state. Naugatuck River is actually a tributary to the Housatonic. It's actually the largest river entirely contained or within the state of Connecticut, for whatever that's worth. This is a hydroelectric dam, but it is defunct. It hasn't been operational for a number of years now. It's changed hands through several operators that have failed to find a way to make it work. Running a hydroelectric dam is a lot like buying a house. You got to find a way to pay off the mortgage within 30 years. And if you can't make the numbers work, then it's not economically viable. And several operators have gone through that process and said, okay, this is a done deal. And so now it's an effort on our part. We're teamed up with quite a few organizations to try to remove this dam, and it's going to take some time because it's a very complicated project. It'll be the first of many. It'll be many firsts in this state because it's the first dam that's currently managed by FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, that will be attempted to be removed in the state. So it'll be an interesting endeavor, and it's going to be a long-term push. I wanted to talk about the project timeline it takes, because these projects take a long time to get going. And so these are the steps that I kind of identified. We first identify projects, first looking at a map, talking to people we know, or being out on the ground itself, kind of do a general high level, assess the feasibility. Is this something that could actually be viable? We we assess community interests and concerns. We try to identify a landowner and approach that landowner and say, is this something you would be okay with, assuming this is in private hands? Talk to the partner agencies, the regulatory agencies. Is this a priority for you? Would you be receptive to a permit application if we were to propose this to you? Then we try to scope out the cost to do an assessment, a design, permitting task, engineering investigation. And we also estimate those costs. And then from that information, we then start to apply for funding. So there is a handful of steps that need to happen before we even get funding to help support a project. And that's where private donations come in that help us sort of seed these projects and get the first ball rolling. After we get funding, assuming we win a grant and get some funding for it, then we issue requests for proposals, contract and hire an engineering consultant that then conducts site investigation, data collection, preliminary design. We may then need to apply for more funding to push it to 90% design and permitting. That gets submitted to the regulatory agencies. Agencies have lots to say in these projects. That their comments, their permit conditions, that everything else that comes out of that turns into the 100% designs. And at that point, it's shovel ready. So here we are in step 14 of 18, and we have a project that's shovel ready. There's lots of funding programs that like to only fund shovel ready project. Well, it takes a long time to get a project to be shovel ready. And that's just one of the hurdles that we have to work through, is the amount of time and energy it takes to get a project up to that point. Then you need to apply for construction funding. Fortunately, right now with the bipartisan infrastructure law, there are good sources of funding out there. It's kind of a once in a career moment for me with that kind of abundance of funding. And then you go through construction bidding and contracting. Construction itself can take 3 months. It could take maybe 6 months, 9 months. Perhaps it's spread out over 2 years. Most of the time it's not. And then post-construction monitoring, we're often expected to do 5 years of monitoring after a project to monitor for its success and any issues that may arise that weren't anticipated. And we do not work alone. We can't do this work alone. We wouldn't want to if we could, but we can't. These are done with partnerships. We have many collaborators: Connecticut Deep Fisheries, dam safety are two agencies that have a lot to say on these projects. NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is a huge funder and also a technical advisor on these. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service also has interest in funding programs. And then we have partner organizations, Trout Unlimited, the Nature Conservancy, Housatonic Valley Association, Farmington River Watershed Association, Connecticut River Conservancy. All of those organizations are part of our River Restoration Network. We're trying to share expertise, trying to divvy up the work, trying to figure out ways to multiply our efforts, and try to sort of spread the work around. But we work with municipalities, councils of government, universities and colleges, watershed organizations, volunteers, and of course, private donors that help make some of this stuff happen that wouldn't otherwise get off the ground. So that's it. I don't know where I came out. 12:30. I'm maybe a little bit off schedule, but I can take a couple questions now, or we could just hold them for later. But I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Paul. And unless there's any immediate questions, as Paul said, there will be some time at the end. So I'll hand it over to Alex to get started. Thanks.
Hey everyone, can you see me okay? Hear me okay? See my screen?
Yes.
Awesome. Just want to add two partner groups to the end of that list, Paul. The engineering consultants who we contract to help us design these projects, and then the construction contractors themselves, who actually get in and do the work and drive these yellow machines that you're seeing in my photo here. I think those, I'm not sure if I missed those on your list, Paul, but I just wanted to give those a shout out to those folks as well, because they, their skills and expertise really make what we want to do on the ground possible. I'm going to launch into this. I have a lot of details, so I'm going to try to do it pretty quickly, and then we can follow up with any questions on anything I've glossed over that people want to know more about. I'm going to talk about the Merwin Meadows, the Dana Dam, aka Shrunk Pond Dam, removal that we completed this summer at Merwin Meadows Park on the Norwalk River, Wilton, Connecticut. Okay, so talking about a little bit of watershed context here. Dam removals are not as impactful in a vacuum, so we look at the entire watershed. There had been a previous dam removal downstream and another dam removal upstream of this site. So there was a lot of habitat that could be interconnected with this removal of Dana Dam here in Wilton. And we already know that these migratory fish, these diagenous fish species, are present in the Norwalk River all the way upstream from the Sound to Wilton, to Merwin Meadows Park. So quick overview of kind of the general design features of this project. What we're doing is going from like a slightly over widened impoundment. It's a run of the river impoundment, so it's not big and wide like a big giant lake, but it is wider and obviously slower than the natural flow of the stream. There's a small upstream island, the primary channel, or prior, sorry, this is previous, the primary channel along a stretch of railroad embankment. And there was kind of minimal, due to the shape of this valley, minimal wetlands formed along. There was some riverine emergent habitat and scrub habitat. And what we did was we removed the dam and created a single channel. We realigned the channel away from the stretch of railroad embankment. We installed riffles, and we did restore or retain or recreate some bits of wetland along here. And also by narrowing the width of the stream, we added new riparian buffer habitat, which is good for habitat, water quality, and things like that. So for this sort of like horizontal channel definition and containment, we used bank armoring. So kind of like riprap style banks, but the voids kind of filled with soil and planted with various native plants. So native seeds, as well as shrub live stakes. And the idea is that those banks will hold the channel in a stable position, but also create habitat and grow and not be kind of just a uniform rock bank along the stream channel. This is a kind of doctored image of the longitudinal profile that Paul showed. So the river flows from the right to the left, or had flown from the right to the left on this light blue line, and then fell over the dam and went downstream. But what we did was we removed the dam, and now the river follows this dark blue dashed line over a series of engineered riffles. And I'll explain more about those in a minute, but basically what those riffles are doing is stepping the stream channel down. And if you notice, these two yellow triangles are pointing out the water surface elevation below the project site and above the project site. And the key of this design was to keep those the same. So basically you're stepping the water down from above the project site to below it. And what those engineered riffles are just kind of like rock steps or rock ramps. And you can see, it's probably not too perceptible here, but that dark line, that dark dashed blue line is actually going down at a slight slope. So what it's doing is like holding the water at a high elevation above and then dropping it down, but not quite so steep and not quite so vertical that fish can't swim up it. We're also including rock boulders in that riffle to kind of create different flows and habitats for fish, and then a low flow channel, so even at lower flows fish can get upstream. And what that ends up looking like on site is just like kind of a little rapid. So you wouldn't notice that that's an engineered structure unless you were really looking for it. A third really important design piece of this was sediment management. So this is kind of a confusing image. Basically what this is we're digging soil or digging sediment from one location on the site, moving it to another, kind of out of the flow path, stabilizing it and isolating it with by putting topsoil and plant material on top of it. We really did not want to move any material offsite because that's very expensive. It's a bunch of trucks driving down the road full of sediment. Our sediment contaminants levels were not too high here. There was no like human exposure risks. There was some like environmental toxicology or toxic risks that we work with DEEP to get this sediment management plan approved. So this is done with minimal risk to the environment. Construction phasing. There's a lot here. What I'll just say is basically there's 4 phases of construction, and the main idea is to lower the water level, segregate like this first section of work with cofferdams. You'll see that coming up. So basically water management to dry, isolate and dry out this area, do the construction, and then hopscotch that over. So you just kind of are keeping one section dry at a time as you're moving downstream, and then finally removing the dam at the just about at the very end of the project. So this probably seems like kind of a heavy-handed approach, lots of rock, lots of excavation, lots of manipulation of the channel here. The reason that that's so necessary is because when this dam was built in the 1940s, they didn't just build the dam, they actually excavated the impoundment to create like a deeper pool for recreation. And then they took all that sediment, but all that material that they excavated and placed it on the banks so that the banks were higher. They created a sort of retaining wall made of boulders around here. So there was no like legacy channel. There was no natural channel bed underneath that impoundment. And the river was really disconnected from its floodplain. So that meant we had to, when we got in there to keep the river in a place we wanted it to be, we had to reconstruct those banks and regrade those floodplain areas. The other really important thing that required us to use a lot of rock and a lot of heavy engineering is just the proximity to critical infrastructure. So at the upstream section of this impoundment is that railroad embankment I was telling you about. And we could just remove the dam and the river would find its own channel and path, because that's what rivers do. But because this is such an important piece of infrastructure, we can't allow that to happen. So we need to really get the river into its place and make it kind of like a static system as opposed to a dynamic system, which rivers naturally are. And you might think, oh, we're worried about things that are downstream, but it's actually changing the flow can adjust the erosive patterns upstream. So that's why we were really concerned about this. That's why we moved the river away from the railroad embankment. And we wanted to keep that water surface elevation exactly the same upstream. So there was no impact to this feature. So I won't go into too much depth about this project timeline, but I want you to just to focus on these green blocks, which are the times when we were doing physical work on the ground. So that was about most of 2023, some site prep in the spring, construction through about 6 months of the summer, some earlier site prep in 2021, but then all of this administrative stuff that had to happen beforehand, permitting, stakeholder coordination, constant fundraising, constant ongoing partner coordination. Yeah, 2019 is kind of when we got on board and started doing this work, but other partners have been laying the groundwork for this dam removal for about a decade or more before then, getting folks up to speed, getting the public involved and engaged and excited about this project. So I'd say this was an even longer timeline. This is just our timeline. So yeah, and I don't mean to say that it was all bad, getting to this point. But this is a lot of the stuff that there's no celebration event for this type of stuff, for setting up meetings, getting people to the table, getting permits approved, calculating flow speeds. There's no, celebration event for that. But that's what it takes to really get this work done. So construction, that's the exciting part. So we're going to talk about that now. Water management, as I said, was the major component of doing this work. It's in a flowing river, so you got to take care of the water that's coming downstream, and that water level can change based on the rain. So some of the main things that this entailed was notching the dam, but leaving it in place so that we could let more water out from behind the impoundment so that we had a drier condition to work in. Using these, and when I say we, I really mean the construction contractor who did that. I believe they're on here, Chad from Sumco. So feel free to weigh in on any of this construction stuff if you feel it's moved. These are just big giant sandbags that are used to create a temporary dam around a work site or a section of work. This is a big conduit pipe that passes the water through the area you're working, and then you pump it out so that you can have like a dry section or dry-ish section to do the work you need to do. And then this is the pipe discharging below the work site. And you can see that dam is still in place till the very end. Leaving the dam in place to the very end was important because we wanted, in case the water, if flows did come up, which they did a few times, it was more like filling up a bathtub and flooding the site rather than a torrent of water with a lot of energy moving through that site with no dam in place to kind of backwater it and slow that flow. So excavation and repositioning sediment, like I said, this is removing or over excavating that new channel along on the other side of that island so that we could pass the proper amount of flow through that side. Obviously excavating around the dam itself, and then placing material in that channel closure area against the railroad embankment because we wanted to move the river away from there. Oh, that's my alarm. I got to stop soon. And then spreading topsoil out across this floodplain because we're regrading that area to reconnect the floodplain. You'll see that in a second. The rock features, as I said, they're really important. We brought in a lot of rock. So this is kind of building a riffle out from one stream bank across the channel to the other, and then getting that to the proper elevation to meet the grade requirements. Building a revetment to to isolate both sides of that channel closure area. These rocks that you see all pointed to are very deliberately placed. Those are habitat boulders, which within the channel, so it's not just an even flat substrate. These boulders create like, little habitat elements and different flow patterns that fish and other aquatic organisms can use. Obviously, we're using big equipment to do this, but then you can see this young person here standing, spraying water onto this. That's actually washing in the fine sediments and fine material into those rock features, so they're as kind of watertight as possible. Otherwise, water just flows right through them, and they don't really do what they need to do. So then site restoration, we've got erosion and sediment control blankets, you can see that a few months later, planted with native plants, is kind of going nuts, very well vegetated. This is one of those floodplain areas. We've got erosion and sediment control mat on a area that we really needed to kind of hold in place. And then we've got hydro seed and some large woody material. Again, native plants spread all over this area. And this slide I actually almost forgot to include. It wasn't even in my outline, just because the demolition of the dam takes such a small amount of the actual project time. I think this happened in a couple of weeks as opposed to the 6 months of the entire project. But yeah, they just walk out with an excavator with a jackhammer on the end of that arm and smash up the concrete and put it in trucks and take it away. No dynamite is involved, no matter how many times people ask us. That would not have been permitted by Metro North, certainly. And that's it. So here's a posed photo of Paul and myself looking out over the site. The dam had been right there. That hydro-seeded floodplain is growing in nicely. And you can see some of those rock features, a riffle and the armored banks right beyond us. Thanks.
But I was just gonna say, thanks so much, Alex. Both you and Paul, I learned a lot, gave a great detailed description, but in simple terms. I'd love to look at some of those graphs that were there closer up and take some more time to digest them. So we will be sharing this afterwards with both attendees and with people who let us know that they weren't able to join but really wanted to see it. So we did record it, and I'll open it up for questions. And it looks like, Bob, did you have a question? Do you
I
want
was
to jump
ready
in?
to jump in with a few. First of all, that was fascinating, and I had no idea how complex the planning and actual reconstruction is. Of the 4,200 dams in Connecticut, how many are ones that order of magnitude are targets for this kind of work?
I guess I could, well, let's say we have a wish list that is, in flux, and we keep close to our chest, but it probably has 50 on it right now. I'm not exactly sure the number, but somewhere between 25 and 50. So we're on a very small fraction of the total right now.
And what determines whether Save the Sound or some other group takes the lead? And when you're working in partnership, I just wanted to get or another way of asking it is, if you guys didn't exist, are there other people driving this kind of work? And what determines when you do it, when they do?
I would not say there's a formal process for that. Right now, it's kind of driven by capacity and what organization feels like they can take it on, whether they have ownership or some particular ties to the site or maybe to the dam owner. The situation here now is that there's way more work than we can all do. So it's not really a game of hungry hippo here. It's a who can step up to help with this one. And so I think right now Save the Sound has probably more expertise in-house to handle some of the complex projects. But we are, looking at some of the smaller dams and sort of suggesting, hey, this might be a good one for you guys to take on with some of our other partners. So, and right now we're very collaborative. So, when another organization takes it on, whether it's FRWA or something like that, sometimes we sort of step in as sort of advisors or just providing sort of external, guidance on them. So I hope that answers your question. It's not
yeah. And one last one, Alex, order of magnitude, how much did that project that you were describing cost?
It was a few $1 million with construction and engineering, staff time and everything. Yeah.
Okay. I'll let someone else have a turn. Then I had a couple more, but
I just want to mention a few things about why people when Save the Sound might step in on projects. There's Paul and I who know a bit about rivers. There's the rest of our ecological restoration team who has significant engineering and consultant experience. We also have other folks like our finance team and our outreach and engagement team, development team, our legal team, who we have to tap all of those folks for a lot of this work. And sometimes a smaller organization just doesn't have the capacity to manage like a multi-million-dollar contract to get a giant construction project done. So yeah, I guess I would just say that it's not just Paul and I, it's everybody else also on our staff that makes us able to do this stuff.
Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for adding that, Alex. I see David DeBell put a question over in the chat. Feel free to unmute David and jump in, but I'll just read it for you guys. It's thank you for a great presentation. And how long does it take to repopulate insect fish and the general ecology of the reconstructed habitat?
I would add to that, what is the target? What is for the target population for reestablishing in terms of migratory fish, insects for freshwater fish, biota, etc.
Yeah, I mean, fish will sometimes return within days of a project. So I was on one project not too long ago. It's a very small dam, and fish moved through the site as the machines were working, and we saw them go right up through. And it's like, holy crap! They didn't even wait a minute, for that. But the restoration of like a macroinvertebrate population, for example, would take time. So thinking about it in terms of where you're looking. So, upstream of the dam, we have a lot of fine sediment that takes some time to move out or either be excavated. And so that's going to take some while of probably a growing season or two for it to be recolonized by, the mayflies, stoneflies, caddisflies, that kind of community. In the case of like Strong Pond, where they were a constructed riffle, that is imported material being put in place. So it is very virgin material, and that probably would take a little bit longer. We don't know. I don't think we know exactly how fast it takes for that to sort of recolonize. But the macroinvertebrate community in general is often heavily sampled by a lot of natural resource agencies as a way of sort of measuring sort of long-term water quality trends. And they sample that community so much because it is so resilient to sampling. So that when I say sampling, they're they're using kick nets or other materials that pull those organisms out of the substrate, and then they get preserved in alcohol and identified and tallied. And that's a way of sort of summarizing the quality of that macroinvertebrate community. And they do that annually. So sometimes they'll go back the next year and redo it. So there's not a concern that you're heavily depleting that. So in other words, that's a pretty fast moving community recolonization. Now, in terms of like populations of the migratory fish, that's going to take a while for us to see the rebound. we actually saw the rebound after the Hyde Pond and a couple other projects. We saw fish runs jump to, I guess it was the subsequent year. So the first year after and 2 years after that, we saw the fish run population actually improve substantially. And we were monitoring that through actual nets, fish traps in stream. So we had a tally going. Then we saw them decline. And we realized, and we're actively working in this, they declined because fishing regulations in Long Island Sound and outside of Long Island Sound have changed as a result of the COVID pandemic that relaxed some of the standards. And so we are now focusing, and we have our legal team focusing on fishing regulations in Long Island Sound because they have severely impacted this fish run and this community that was actually on the rise after a couple of our dam removals. So that's one of the instances where it's like we were doing our best on the dam, on the landscape, and then all of a sudden we had to shift our focus because we were getting hit by from another angle on the restoration of that migratory fish community. Alex, did you want to add anything to that?
I think it probably, in terms of repopulating the site, it kind of depends what's already downstream and what's already upstream. Those things can kind of move in, and yeah, it kind of depends. It's hard to say exactly. It just depends on what the surrounding conditions are like.
The mussel community will take the longest to recover because they are, obviously they're sessile and they're dependent on fish, and they need a good fish run in order to repopulate these upper parts of the watershed. So, we hope to witness that in the next few years, but not a guarantee.
Okay. So with about 3 minutes left, we have 2 more questions in the chat, and I imagine there may be a few others who have questions. So I'm going to suggest that we cover the 2 that are in the chat. And then if anyone else does have questions, it's such an interesting topic. I don't want to not give you the opportunity. So when we send the recording, which will be shortly, I'll include my email address in that. And if anybody wants to email me with follow-up questions, I can track down answers and try to respond that way. But we do have Jim and Richard Taylor who have both submitted questions. Jim said, out of curiosity, where does the Rainbow Dam on the Farmington Dam or on the Farmington River stand on your timeline? And then Richard asked, how do you balance placement of fish ladders and dam removals? So I don't know if you want to maybe jump on one of those and follow up separately on the other, or if you think you can cover both of them. I'll leave it to Paul and Alex.
Go ahead, Alex.
Sure. I think maybe we have to get back to you on the Rainbow. Paul, I'm not sure where that stands or what.
Possibly. I mean, I can speak generally that it is a dam on our radar. It's the more we learn about it, the more likely it seems like it needs to be looked at. It's not really actively generating power, contrary to what we believed and what many people believed. So it's an issue I think on the horizon for us. And then as far as the placement of fish ladders and dam removals, that's an ongoing discussion. Fish ladders have been used a lot around the state, probably more so than other states. But deep fisheries is pivoting away from them to some degree. They kind of overstretched in terms of like their ability to. Fish ladders require maintenance and inspection and work, and they were taking that on. But everywhere they were installing a new technical fishway, it's a drain on resources and time and staff time. So they're sort of shifting away from reliance on fish ladders and trying to put more of an emphasis on permanent solutions like dam removal. And we're trying to support that.
Yeah, I would say not all fish ladders work or work well. Just about every dam removal, I would say. probably works well. So we prioritize that. We do pursue fish ladders and nature-like fishways. If the dam absolutely cannot be removed and the ecological priority for restoring fish connectivity is high enough, then we do pursue those. We're working on designs for a nature-like fishway on the Whitford Brook into a large, incredible habitat for river herring. So we can see, hundreds of thousands of river herring migrating into that system if that was restored. So we pursue that, but we don't want to put a fishway on every last dam because they just don't have the same impact as a removal.
Yeah, and I can add to that too. The Rainbow Dam and the Kinneytown Dam, which the Kinneytown one we are actively working on. They both have had fishways built on them decades ago. They were state of the art at the time, and now it's acknowledged that they're basically not functioning. They're dysfunctional, and they may be causing more harm than good. Some of that was behavioral, just not understanding exactly what fish we're gonna go for. Some of it is sort of structural and operational issues, but unfortunately, fishways have proven to be have not met, I think, their original promises or aspirations when they were first installed, and so there's an interest in moving away from fishways towards removal.
Okay, thanks so much. I see Bob Congan entered one more question, but we are at time. So I don't know if Paul and Alex, if you have a few more minutes, but I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. Anyone who needs to drop off, the webinar at this point, please do, and we will follow up with the recording. But thank you so much. And Bob had entered the question, are any private dam owners using them for small scale hydropower? And using them, do you mean using dams or using the fish ladders? I don't know if maybe Paul and Alex understand the question clearer than I do, but.
So, and Bob can chime in if he wants to. But there are several, I'd say, private organizations or companies that are they're sort of looking at the landscape of Connecticut and in other states, all the northeastern states really, to see what dams could potentially be repowered if they're not actively generating power now. Like I said, it's a bit of like a financial real estate transaction that needs to be. You have to think about your capital costs to repair the dam. Anything that was built before 1970 is probably way out of compliance to current dam safety standards and frankly our current hydroclimatic regime, which is causing more floods than ever before. So there's a significant amount of investment that needs to happen to take a non-functioning dam to a functioning level. And then parallel to that, you need to accommodate some kind of fish passage with a fish ladder of some kind. Both of those things add a tremendous amount of cost, and the current energy rates right now are I think challenging for small hydro to really be operating at a profit or even break even. We're hearing sort of unofficially that some operators are at a loss right now in terms of their economic viability. So that puts the land, that sort of paints I think a bleak picture for hydro. And there's, we have concerns that some hydropower is been sort of greenwashed a little bit in terms of saying that this is it's a renewable source of energy, but it is not without its impacts. And if that particular site is blocking off a really important migratory fish run or having some other ecological impact, then we would probably look at that a little bit askew. And so I think the short answer is yes, there's still small hydropower. There's still entities looking to do that. There's still some small some dam owners that are looking into that, but the economics are pretty challenging. The most recent one I know of is actually done on the Quinnipiac River I believe in the town of Meriden. They repowered Hanover Pond Dam, and they used a really interesting, it's an Archimedes screw. It's ancient technology, but updated and modernized, and it is operating and generating power for Meriden. And I don't know exactly the economics of that, but that was an interesting site that I had checked out a few years ago, and I believe is still operational. And it does have fishway. And one of the benefits of the Archimedes screw is that it allows for fish to move downstream as well. They can actually move through that Archimedes screw without being killed or injured. So there's that was an interesting example, but pretty rare, I'd say. Bob, feel free to follow up if you want to talk more.
That's a great answer. Thank you. And thank you both so much. Fascinating presentation. Wish you well. Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you. You too.
Yes, thank you all for joining, and thanks Paul and Alex for such a great presentation. And we do have another upcoming webinar. We'll be sending you guys information on it. We're offering another one in December, so more to come.
Great. Thanks. Bye all.
Yep.